Welcome back to Over My Dead Pod. I'm Kylie Caldwell.
I'm Kate Carter.
And I'm Holly Spear.
Today I have a story for you all that I'm sure everyone knows, or at least the gist of, so I wanted to do a little deep dive into it. Starting off, on the 4th of July in 1990, Rhonda Bailey witnessed two women rushing to get out of a crashed car before running on foot. Rhonda called the Orange Springs, Florida police to report the odd incident and the abandoned car. Police arrived and realized that the car belonged to a man named Peter Sims, who had gone missing while on a road trip from Jupiter, Florida, a month prior. They searched the car for some clues as to where Peter may be and who these women were. After some dusting, investigators were able to pull a handprint off the interior door handle. This print later matched a thumbprint found on a pawn shop receipt for items stolen from a man named Richard Mallory, a man who was found dead from several gunshot wounds a few months prior. All of these prints matched back to one woman with a lengthy criminal history, Aileen Wuornos.
Damn, you just hopped right in, huh?
I don't know how to get it going.
Can we also talk about the fact that the Peter was from Jupiter, Florida?
Yes,
Shout out.
I didn't know that.
you didn't.
No.
Hey, how long have you lived there?
On and off for 6 years.
And Aileen was arrested in my hometown, Port Orange. So,
Oh, look at that. Connections.
connections. So, as we all know, Aileen is probably the most well-known female serial killer, but of course, like I said, she was also arrested in my hometown, so I had to do a story on her. To get to know Aileen and her story, her childhood is really important, so we'll start with that. She was born on February 29th, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan, to Leo Pittman and Diane Wuornos. At the time of her birth, her mother Diane was 16 and her father Leo was 20. They were married 2 years before, so only when her mom was 14, and they had a son the year before Aileen was born, named Keith. But it was just Aileen, Diane, and Keith in the house because Diane had filed for a divorce from Leo 2 months before she was born. She actually never met her dad because he's either in prison or in mental hospitals basically her entire early childhood. In 1967, Leo was sentenced to life in prison for the kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder of a 7-year-old girl. And while he was in prison, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. A short 2 years later, in 1969, Eileen's father committed suicide in prison by hanging. So we're not off to a great start.
Dang, no.
Now, onto the mom because she wasn't the best either. A year after Leo's suicide, when Aileen was 4, Diane took her and her older brother to visit their grandparents. Diane said they were just going to pop in for the night, catch up, see the grandparents, hang out. But instead, she just up and ditched the kids there without even telling her parents.
How many kids?
2. So where Diane goes from here, I have no idea. I did find an obituary that said she died in 2002 in San Diego, but from what I could gather, Aileen never saw or spoke to her mother after she was abandoned. No idea what she was up to. And Diane died from liver failure, likely due to alcoholism. And alcoholism is a big part of the story, as many people know. And basically, everyone in it is an alcoholic, including the grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. And Lori is the name of the grandpa, by the way. So after a few months of living with the grandparents, they formally adopted Aileen and Keith, as it was clear Diane was not coming back. In the house was also the grandparents' other 2 children, Barry and a daughter also named Lori. So they're Eileen's aunt and uncle. So I'm just going to stick with aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa. Either way, this house is a nightmare. Not only are both grandparents alcoholics, but grandpa was also a child molester and began molesting Aileen at a pretty young age.
This girl doesn't even have a chance. This is terrible. No one to look up to in her life.
Everyone's literally the worst.
Yeah.
So grandpa would also physically beat her and mentally abuse her. Sad to report, one time he forced her to watch him drown a kitten.
Hate him. Hate him.
Aileen never had a chance.
No.
Literally, from day one. I always knew she had a bad background, and a lot of our cases do have come from horrific childhoods, but hers is just, it's unfortunate. Like, you kind of assume something bad will happen in her life, but yeah, I mean, she turned out to be quite a bad one.
As
Yeah.
expected.
When
As
I'm
expected.
when we're talking about people's childhoods, I always am thinking like nature versus nurture with the alcohol thing. It's probably like nature a little bit, but gosh, I mean, this kid, sad. There's just not a lot of nurture there.
None at all. So, anyways, there's all sorts of abuse happening in this house, and Eileen was obviously described as not normal, a distant, cold child, didn't behave like the others. Things did change, but for the worse, when Eileen was 10 or 11. This is when she found out that her grandparents were not her actual parents, which is what they made her believe this whole time. So she had no recollection of her mother. She thought she just grew up in that house, like her grandparents were her parents. She thought her aunt and uncle were her siblings. Kind of messed up. Side note, Ted Bundy was also raised by his grandparents, who for like a long time he thought were his parents.
I wonder if that's better or worse. I mean, or
In these two cases, worse.
yeah, it's just like, I don't know, to know that your parents left you. I don't know if that's harder than thinking that these people are your parents. I don't know. I don't know what's worse. It's both terrible. So,
Once this came to light, Eileen started to act out even more and now sexually. She began to exchange sexual activities with other boys or even grown men in exchange for cigarettes, drugs, or food. And this earned her the local nickname of Cigarette Pig at just 11 years old.
okay.
Why is the pig part of it? That's really sad. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, you'll look at her and you think, not good. But at 11 years old, that's so mean.
Aileen also told reporters later that around this time she also had sexual relations with her brother, Keith.
Oh.
Meanwhile, the sexual abuse by her grandfather is still going on, but now he is inviting his friends to come on into the house and join in. No idea if the grandma knew about any of this, but she soon found out because in 1970, 14-year-old Eileen got pregnant by one of her grandfather's friends and hid the pregnancy for 7 months. The grandma quickly sent Eileen away to a group home for unwed mothers for the rest of her pregnancy.
There's a place for unwed mothers at this time? What is that?
I think it was a big thing back
I'm
then,
sure. I'm sure.
because obviously it's like highly frowned upon to have a child out of wedlock.
Right.
And they kind of just sent you away so no one would see you and you wouldn't embarrass your family.
Oh, you wouldn't embarrass them? Okay.
Yeah.
Say there are this may be something different, but like I know there's one in our town, but there's also homes that will host single mothers during their
Yeah.
pregnancies who can't help themselves during their pregnancies.
Yeah.
Like, and I think they take all ages as well because I've donated, like, they take a lot of baby clothes, mother stuff, and I've donated some stuff to them that like need the assistance. But in this case, I think Aileen was forced to go to a home.
I don't think anyone ever questioned, like, why is this 14-year-old showing up pregnant?
Yeah, that's no good.
So on March 23rd, 1971, Eileen gave birth to a baby boy and gave him up for adoption the same day before returning back to the house. Only a few months later, her grandma died of liver failure, also due to alcoholism. By now, Eileen was 15, and I guess her grandpa was done with her because he kicked both her and her brother Keith out of the house. Eileen was forced to drop out of school and began to live in the woods nearby, working as a prostitute to make money. I'm assuming Keith was like also in the woods for a time, not really sure where he went or what he was doing, but Eileen did this for a bit, eventually on her own before she started to hitchhike across the country. Very little is known about Eileen's life for the next 3 years. We do know, thanks to court records, that in 1974, at the age of 18, Eileen was arrested for the first time in Colorado. She was driving around erratically, firing a gun out the window, the fun stuff, and she was eventually pulled over and charged with a DUI, disorderly conduct, and firing a weapon from a moving vehicle. Eileen was later charged with failure to appear after skipping her court date. Another 2 years went by with no information as to what she was up to or where, but assumingly she was on the run. Information picks back up again in 1976. In March, Eileen's grandfather, Lori, died by suicide, and Eileen, of course, did not attend the funeral. By now, she had hitchhiked all the way down to Florida. She kept working as a prostitute about 4 days a week in order to earn enough money to bounce around from motel to motel and to also afford her growing drinking habit. In interviews later in prison, Aileen described the torture she faced while working. She said she had been maced, beaten, and raped by multiple men. She claimed to have slept with over 200,000 men while working as a prostitute. Aileen does tend to lie a lot, as we all know, and her stories change, but I'm sure there's at least some truth to this. I'm not sure if this guy was a client of hers, but pretty soon after Aileen got down to Florida, she married a rich older man named Louis Gratzfeld. He was 70 and Aileen is 20. They met at a bar and got married after only a few weeks of knowing each other. And there wasn't any honeymoon phase because Aileen was violent the entire time. One night while out drinking at a bar, Aileen beat Louis with his own cane and he got a restraining order against her.
Dang, girl, you should have just.
Fumbled the bag.
Yeah, you did. You fumbled hard. Just ride that out, you know?
So things weren't going well in Florida, to say the least, and Aileen decided to move back to Michigan for a fresh start. This didn't go well because pretty soon after coming back, she was arrested at a club for assault after throwing a cue ball at a bartender's head. Only 3 days later, her brother Keith died of esophageal cancer. The exact same week all this happened, Louis annulled his marriage with Aileen, so she is completely alone. But don't worry, because Aileen hit the jackpot. She was the sole heir to her brother's $10,000 life insurance payout.
Hey, I mean, to her, that's probably a good chunk of money.
Yeah, and you think she'd, get an apartment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stop moving from motel to motel, maybe get a car, get a job. She did buy a brand new car. She totaled it like 2 weeks later, and she spent all of the money within 2 months.
Yeah, I can only imagine what she's spending on as well. She's truly not like, I don't even know how to describe Eileen. There's just so many fucked up things about her history, the way that she has never been treated as human, So like, not to say what she's gonna do is okay, but
yeah, I mean, it's like that a lot of times with the cases we talk about as a kid. These kids that don't have a chance, it's really sad. And then it sucks even more when they are older and they can make these conscious decisions and then it becomes their fault. But as kids, it's so hard to not feel sorry for them. I think it's okay to feel sorry for them to a point.
Yeah. Recognize that a bad person had bad things happen to them.
Yep.
Yeah.
For like their whole life.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this girl, she does not get a break.
No, it's so unfair.
And she also makes a lot of bad decisions.
Horrible decisions.
Horrible.
The worst of the worst. Okay. Anyways.
Every time. So in August of 76, she got another fine for drunk driving. So this was back when you just had to pay a ticket basically instead of going to prison for that. But she did manage to go a few years without any more trouble with the law. Not to say she wasn't having a hard time because she did attempt to commit suicide by shooting herself in the stomach at the age of 22. Aileen later told psychiatrists that she had attempted suicide at least 6 times before this, with the first time being when she was only 14. So there's a lot of gaps with no information. This is before the internet and stuff. So her story doesn't pick back up again until 81, and this time we're back in Florida. So she made her way back there, probably hitchhiking, and she gets arrested again. This time was for the armed robbery of a convenience store. Miss Aileen walked into the store in her bikini and with her pistol, demanding $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes. So unfortunately for her, though, this would be the first time Aileen would get some serious prison time, going away for 13 months. A year after being released, Aileen was arrested down in Key West for forged checks. Her little crime spree continued all across Florida for the next 2 years. She was named a suspect in the theft of a gun and ammunition in Pasco County. In Miami, she was arrested for car theft, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice. Apparently, she had handed the officer someone else's ID she had stolen. In Daytona Beach, she was questioned after a guy accused her of attempting to rob him at gunpoint. Police searched her car and found a .22 pistol under the driver's seat, along with a boatload of ammunition, but they never arrested her. So I think we all get the picture though. She's just running around, robbing
Mhm.
people, drinking, living the good Florida life. But then things changed because she met the love of her life, a woman named Tyria Moore.
She's something. She is something.
The couple met at Zodiac, a gay bar in Daytona, when Aileen was 30 and Tyria was 24, and they were like immediately in love, head over heels. Tyria had just left her family in Ohio because they were homophobic. She wanted a fresh start, and she just wanted to live her life as a fully out and open lesbian in what better place? So the couple moved in together pretty quickly, not into like a house together, but bouncing from motel to motel, crashing on friends' couches, and spending some time in various trailer parks. Tyria worked as a motel maid and occasional housekeeper, but she wasn't quite sure what Aileen did for work. It took months into their relationship for Aileen to open up about one, her being a prostitute, two, her childhood abuse, and three, her criminal history. In fact, when they met, Aileen was going by one of her aliases, Lee. Tyria didn't learn her real name for quite a while. So when Tyria found out that Aileen was, out on the corner, she tried to discourage her from doing it, tried to help her get a real job, but Aileen did not listen, of course. Aileen also became super possessive of Tyria, following her to work and basically not letting Tyria out of her sight, confronting anyone who attempted to talk to her girlfriend. In 1987, the two of them were both detained and questioned after a bar fight. Apparently, another woman approached Tyria, and that ended up with Aileen hitting her in the head with a beer bottle. And they were both let go without facing arrest. So this relationship went on for 4.5 years, up until Eileen's arrest. The entire time, Tyria was trying to get Aileen to stop prostituting, and the entire time, Aileen kept it up. One night, after being gone for a while, Aileen came home, and she had a confession. She had just killed a man in self-defense. On November 30th, 1989, Aileen was picked up outside of Tampa by a man named Richard Mallory. Richard was a 51-year-old electronics store owner from Clearwater. Aileen gave different recounts of what happened that night after Richard solicited her. In one story, Aileen said she was hitchhiking and agreed to exchange sex for a ride back to Daytona. At one point, Richard reportedly unzipped his pants. Fearing he was going to rob or rape her, Aileen grabbed her gun and a fight ensued. In the end, Aileen was able to grab the gun back, pointing it at him while saying, quote, "You son of a bitch, I knew you were going to rape me," end quote. Aileen then claimed to have shot him once from the passenger seat before climbing over him to get out. She went on to say that Richard got up and out of the car, so she shot him 3 more times. Aileen then dumped his body in the woods near Daytona and abandoned his car a few miles north in Ormond Beach.
Don't you think if you were killing someone like in self-defense, you wouldn't be like dumping bodies?
Yeah, if he's turning to run, it's probably not self-defense.
But then again, she was a prostitute in this day and age. Nobody believed anything they said.
Even to this day, yeah.
Yeah, very true.
So even if it was full, honestly, like self-defense, and he did hurt her or tried to hurt her, I think she still would have like hit the body. So she did give a second story. In this one, she said Richard picked her up and the two drove to the woods where they drank, smoked, and talked for upwards of 5 hours. Aileen said when she got undressed, Richard suddenly claimed he didn't have the money to pay her. So Aileen put her clothes back on. When she was doing this, Richard put a cord around her neck, claiming he was going to kill her, saying things like, quote, "like the other sluts I've done," end quote.
Her story doesn't just like change a little bit. I mean, they're completely different narratives.
When she's giving these confessions to police, like she's quoting what's said and like what she said and what they said.
Mm-hmm.
It's very descriptive.
Yeah.
Aileen then claimed that Richard tied her hands to the steering wheel before brutally raping her. When Richard was cleaning up the blood, Aileen then said she shot him. Again, all according to Aileen. But we do know that Richard was shot 4 times, with 2 bullets in his left lung being the official cause of death. His car was found on December 2nd, 1989, and his car was found on December 13th. So when Aileen was telling Tyria about what happened, the self-defense, she told her that she had gone through all of his belongings in the car. She threw some things away in the trash, she kept some things for herself, and then she pawned the rest of it. She also told Tyria that she had thrown the gun she used into the Rose Bay. Tyria believed her, believed it was self-defense, but she also made Aileen swear to her that it would never happen again and she wouldn't snitch on her.
Also, it doesn't sound like it's self-defense when you're like, okay, but promise you're never gonna let it happen again. It's like,
Sounds a little sketch.
yeah.
Please make sure you're never abused and have to do self, defense and kill
Wink,
someone.
wink.
Yeah. And I won't tell on you for your self-defense.
Yeah.
Guys, they're in love, okay? On May 18th, 1990, 47-year-old David Spears told his coworkers and boss at his construction job that he was going to be going on vacation to Orlando for a few days. He never made it and was reported missing the next day. A few weeks later, David's almost entirely naked body, minus the hat he was wearing, was found off of US 19 a little north of Tampa. His truck was nearby with all the doors unlocked, but the license plate was missing. Nearby, investigators located a used condom. It took a few days to identify David, and the coroner determined that his cause of death was 6 gunshot wounds, the result of a .22 pistol. The third victim of Aileen was murdered the same month, estimated to be on May 31st, 1990. Charles Carskadden was a 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker, which I think is a cool job.
Part-time.
He's at the rodeo sometimes, not all the time.
Just whatever he wants to.
Yeah.
So he drove to Tampa in his little Cadillac for a little vacation on the 31st. A short week later, Charles' decomposing body was found covered in an electric blanket in Pasco County. The same day, his Cadillac was found several miles away. The coroner ended up finding 8 bullets in Charles's body, all from a .22 pistol. The coroner couldn't determine which one was the fatal bullet, as all of them could have been the cause of death. So Aileen hasn't opened up about the details of what happened with any of the victims other than Richard, the first one, but we do know that witnesses spotted a woman matching her description driving Charles' Cadillac shortly after the murders. Police also located Charles' gun, which Aileen had pawned under a fake name, but of course with her fingerprint as well. So while police were trying to track down the identity of who pawned the gun, another body turned up. And at this point, police hadn't connected any of these murders, which is weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the same MO, same events, same gun.
I don't know if it's because we're in the late 80s, early 90s. I don't know. No one was talking to each other. So on July 30th, 1990, Troy Barres headed out for deliveries as a sausage salesman. He's got another fun job, guys.
Sausage salesman.
When he failed to return back, his manager was concerned. She called around and found out that Troy didn't make any of his afternoon deliveries. With her husband in tow, they headed out to look for him, but they didn't find anything. When Troy also failed to return home, his wife reported him missing around 2 a.m. Only 2 hours later, Troy's truck was found east of Ocala, unlocked, but no keys in sight. 5 days later, a family camping in the Ocala National Forest stumbled upon Troy's body, about 8 miles away from his truck. Like with Charles, Troy's body decomposed rapidly in the Florida summer. The quickest and really only way to identify Troy was when his wife recognized his wedding ring, which was still on his finger. And you might have guessed it, Troy's cause of death was a gunshot wound from a .22 pistol. Troy had been shot once in the chest and once in the back, with the assumption that it was a blitz attack or Troy was attempting to flee. For this murder, they actually arrested a homeless man named Curtis Blankenship.
Poor guy.
Just because he was spotted near kind of where the truck was found later, but they did realize he didn't do it and he was let go. So now police are back to square one. They're like, who is our guy? The 5th victim was really the one that got Aileen caught, and this was Peter Sims, a 65-year-old retired seaman and merchant. In June of 1990, Peter left his home in Jupiter.
We love you, Jupiter. Sorry, Peter.
Sorry, Peter. Anyways,
Some reports said he was road tripping to Arkansas,
shout out Arkansas. Sorry, Peter.
but the court records say New Jersey. We're not going to shout out New Jersey, I'm sorry. He was on this road trip alone in his 1988 Pontiac Sunbird. On the 4th of July, Rhonda Bailey witnessed the same car being crashed into a brush off of State Road 315 from her front porch. Rhonda reported seeing two women climbing out of the car, throwing some beer cans, and arguing. The two women reportedly begged for Rhonda not to call the police about the crash, saying they were just headed up to their dad's house up the road. But Rhonda is a snitch, and she called the police. But they didn't show up in time, and the women had left after the car wouldn't start.
Rhonda, you're a snitch, but helpful.
She did
We
help.
appreciate you, Rhonda. You a snitch. Also, I like that they're pretending to be sisters, right?
Yeah, because it wasn't exactly cool to be a lesbian.
Yeah.
Police did search the car because Peter had been reported as missing back in Jupiter. Inside the car, they found bloodstains, and the license plate was also missing. They dusted the inside and the outside of the car for finger and handprints and hit the jackpot. There was a very detailed handprint on the interior driver's door handle. While this print was processing, police gave out sketches and descriptions of the two women seen in the car to the media. So now it was a waiting game. But get this, to this day, Peter Sim's body has not been located.
Ooh, interesting.
Oh, sorry, Peter.
Which is weird because all of the other victims are found super quickly. Like they're just kind of laying there. Like she didn't hide them well at all.
Yeah.
Odd.
So they're on the run. Their pictures are in the news. Aileen laid low for a good 2 months before she murdered someone else, this time back in Ocala. On September 12th, 1990, the body of Charles Humphreys was found, this time fully clothed. He had been shot 6 times in the chest and head. His car was later found in Suwannee County. Get this. Charles was a 56-year-old former chief of police, expert child abuse investigator, and before joining law enforcement, he was a major in the U.S. Air Force.
Oof, that's rough.
In a later confession, Aileen said she shot him several times to, quote, put him out of his misery, end quote.
So he was alive and kicking?
I guess.
He was fighting. That's so sad. Also, what a life, too. That must have been really sad for like his family and friends.
All of these people. I mean, we know she was a prostitute, but she also hitchhiked. A lot of these guys were married. I don't want to say like, oh, they all picked up Aileen for sex. Like they might have. This was back in the time when people would hitchhike.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Something as innocent as that.
Yeah.
On November 19th, 1990, Aileen's final victim was found off the side of a remote logging road in Dixie County. Walter Antonio was also found nearly nude. He was a 62-year-old security guard and reserve police officer. I'm not sure where Walter was from, but court records said he was traveling to Montgomery, Alabama alone with $145 in cash and without a weapon. Walter's body was found the day after he left with 3 gunshot wounds in the back, with one right below his hairline. The coroner determined this shot would have immediately paralyzed him. And this is brutal. That was the first shot. So when the other bullets hit his lungs, he felt all of them, couldn't move, and he bled internally. None of Walter's belongings were found, including his dentures, which investigators assumed were removed after his death. Later interview, Aileen claimed she didn't remember this murder. In her own words, quote, I don't remember. I was drunk as shit. This one I don't remember. This is a blackout. Man, end quote. When the detective asked her about Walter's ring they found at a pawn shop, Aileen suddenly remembered. It was no longer a blackout. She said that she went out to make some money after drinking probably a case of beer. When they were out deep in the woods, Walter allegedly told her he was a cop, and if she demanded money, he would have to arrest her. Walter then allegedly demanded that she do the deed for free while getting undressed. Aileen didn't believe he was a cop, thinking his badge was fake, but she pulled her gun out and Walter began to run. Aileen shot him in the back as he was running away, and then when Walter fell to the ground, Aileen shot him twice more. Aileen then drives off in his car. She's throwing out all the things in his car, like out the window, into the woods on the highway. She claimed that Walter didn't have his dentures in at the time. That she found them in the glove box and she threw those out too.
What, like, what's the I don't know. She's drunk as fuck.
So by the time of Walter's murder and his body being discovered, police already knew who was responsible. They just had to find her. So all the prints came back matching Aileen. Aileen's photo was passed around, along with a sketch of Tyria, who was seen ditching Peter's car with her. So after Tyria saw her, like their photos in the news, Tyria was out. She's like, I'm done. You keep killing people. I didn't know you were doing this. And she ran away to Pennsylvania. So she wasn't there for the last two murders.
But she was there for the rest of them.
She was in the relationship. I don't know if she did anything. I don't know why she was in Peter's car also.
Because she was there.
You think? That's what people think.
I totally think that. Yeah. Personal opinion. But I think she was involved like in a few.
Or at least like complicit and not like
Yeah. Not the first one and not the last two. So whatever number in between those.
I don't think she was there when it happened, but I think she definitely helped like pawn the stuff, dump the car.
Mm-hmm.
She's getting the benefits of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So on January 9th, 1991, Aileen was arrested at the Last Resort Bar in Port Orange, Florida, my hometown. Another shout out.
Sorry, Peter.
Fun fact, the bar is still there and they have a shrine inside dedicated to Aileen.
Do they?
Her bar stool is encased like in a glass enclosure with her picture and stuff in it.
That's cool.
So the day after Eileen's arrest, Tyria was found in Pennsylvania and agreed to come back to Florida to clear her name. She ended up making a deal with the authorities. If she could get Aileen to confess, she would be immune from all charges. Because police, like, they had the fingerprints, they had the pawned items, they have like two people saying someone who looked like Aileen was in the car, but like that was it. No real hardcore evidence. So they really needed a confession. They put Tyria up into a dingy Daytona motel with a bunch of food and an unlimited supply of Budweiser.
Oh.
It is so Daytona. I love it.
Yeah, like that's especially when you said dingy hotel, I was like, oh, like what, like which one?
It could be any of them.
Mm-hmm.
So all Tyria had to do was call Aileen and get these recorded confessions, and that she did. It took 11 calls of Tyria begging and crying on the phone to help her clear her name. Tyria was like they're gonna charge me for murder. Like they keep wanting to like talk to me. Like they're calling my family and stuff. And Aileen eventually said, quote, "You're innocent. I'm not gonna let you go to jail. Listen, if I have to confess, I will." End quote. Aileen went on to talk about how she was going to go down in history, which she did. And then when asked why she did it, Aileen said this, quote, "Because I fell so fucking in love with you that I was so worried about us not having an apartment and shit, that I was scared that we were going to lose our place, believing we wouldn't be together. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth." End quote. It started out as a self-defense excuse, and now it's a money excuse.
Yeah, it does sound crazy. That's for sure.
So after police had these conversations taped in their hands, Aileen was officially charged with 6 murders. Aileen kept talking and confessing during her formal interrogations with police. On January 16th, Aileen sat down and straight up said, quote, "I'm here to confess to murder." Very nonchalantly. She then declined to have an attorney present and said, "What good would that do? Just take her straight to the electric chair." Basically, she starts crying and begins her story, talking about how she was drunk and these men tried to like either rape or rob her or both, so she killed them all in self-defense. She wanted to like reiterate that Tyria knew nothing about the murders and she didn't want her to get in trouble. That's why she was confessing, not because she felt bad about what she did. The interrogations went on for a while, with Aileen telling what happened with each victim, often changing her story. She also confessed to where the murder weapon was. She had thrown it into Rose Bay near the motel where she had been staying at the time. Tyria actually took the police to where the gun could be found, and after some testing, police confirmed that the bullets found in the bodies matched the grooves on the inside of the barrel. So before the trials even began, something very weird happened. I didn't know this, but Aileen was adopted at the age of 35. Did you guys know about this?
No. Explain.
No, I didn't know about this either.
44-year-old Arlene Prowl saw Eileen's photo in the newspaper after her arrest and said, quote, "God prompted me to do something." Arlene had been adopted by a wealthy couple in Long Island, and after attempting suicide twice, she became a born-again Christian. So she wrote Aileen a letter saying, quote, I don't care if you're guilty or innocent, but I want to be your friend, end quote. So a friendship did bloom. She would go visit her in jail. They talked. Eventually, Arlene and her husband adopted her as their daughter, telling reporters, quote, the reason we did it is we want her to know what it feels like to have a family that really cares about her, end quote. They showed up to support her at her trials, visit her in prison and stuff. But then Arlene started to give interviews to the press for money. And she did use some of the money to hire one of Eileen's attorneys, but we'll see later that turned out to be fishy. I found Arlene and her husband. They're still alive.
Are
And
they?
they have about 1 million Maine Coon cats.
Stop. What? This
What
is
is
just
that?
like a known thing.
I shouldn't have asked. See, that's why people don't learn new things, Kate, is because they're too scared to ask because of people like you.
Wait, did you ask what a Maine Coon cat was?
Yes. That's why I was like, come on, Holly.
I'm
Maine
sorry.
Coon cats are one of the largest breeds of domestic cats.
Like,
They're huge and
I'm
really
supposed
fluffy.
to know that, and I'm supposed to.
They're huge and fluffy. Little shout out to my Chacha Ella. She is a avid listener of our podcast, and like she listens to every episode as soon as they come out. She has a Mancoon, and his name is Mr. Noodles.
Oh, that's a good name.
I like that.
Shit. That's a good one.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people that didn't know what that was, so I'm glad I could forfeit my or volunteer myself as tribute for everybody that didn't know what that was. You're welcome.
I feel like once a week everyone's gonna learn something new because of Holly.
Okay, back to the freaking story. Now for the juicier stuff, the trials. The first trial began on January 14th, 1992, and this was for the murder of Richard Mallory, the first victim. So Aileen was formally charged with first-degree murder, armed robbery with a firearm or deadly weapon, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Because the murder allegedly occurred during the course of a robbery, Aileen was eligible for the death penalty. She confessed to all this, but she decided to plead not guilty. The main argument, the videotaped confession, shouldn't be admissible because it was involuntary, and Aileen didn't have a lawyer present. It, of course, was admitted because Aileen explicitly denied getting a lawyer on several occasions during the interview. And before the trial had even begun, the video was leaked to the media, so everyone had seen it, including the jury. Her public defender also argued that Aileen was not mentally stable. Prior to the trial, Aileen was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. So, borderline personality disorder is a mental health condition in which a person has long-term patterns of unstable or explosive emotions. Makes sense?
Yeah.
Antisocial personality disorder is characterized by impulsive, irresponsible, and often criminal behavior. Also makes sense. Testing also showed that Aileen had hearing loss, vision problems, and an IQ of 81. In case you don't know, anyone with an IQ below 70 can't be sentenced to death.
Okay.
Aileen also scored a 32 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist, with the minimum score to be considered a psychopath being 30. So officially a psychopath.
She aced it.
The prosecution had a different psychiatrist testify that Aileen did have these mental health conditions, but nonetheless was fully capable of understanding what was going on, thus competent to stand trial. One of the first persons to testify was Eileen's aunt, Lori, who basically gave an entirely different account of Eileen's early life. I did so much research, like this story ended up being way longer than I thought it was going to be because I found all the court records, but there's a lot of inconsistencies in what I found. Like even the court records have different information. So I don't know. Just believe what you want to guess. To give this other side from the transcripts, Aunt Lori testified that there was no abuse of any kind in the home. She also said that Aileen and Keith weren't kicked out. They ran away. Her dad, the grandpa, wasn't an alcoholic. There was no sort of sexual relations between Aileen and her brother, etc. So basically the complete opposite of what Aileen had told everybody. Things aren't going well in the trial, and as we know, usually a defendant's prior convictions aren't admissible, to say, hey, this person is a bad person, they've done it before, obviously they did it this time. There are some exceptions to the rule, and in Florida, it's called the Williams rule. So the prosecutor can bring up prior convictions to show a pattern. In this case, it was the hitchhiking with men, prostitution, robbing them, shooting them, dumping them, and pawning their things. So the prosecutor did bring all this up about the other victims. But the thing was, because it's supposed to be you can only use prior convictions, like being found guilty of this, Aileen hadn't even gone to trial for any of these other murders.
So was that admissible?
It should have been, but the judge allowed it.
Uh, yeah, because she wasn't convicted. So
She hadn't even pled to these.
yeah.
Like, we all know she did it, but like, it's kind of messed up.
Gotta follow the rules still.
So then there's another big flaw. So Tyria, the girlfriend, was the big star witness for the prosecution, and she laid out their entire relationship before going into the night that Aileen came home and told her she had killed Richard Mallory. She went over the story about it being self-defense. The prosecution also brought up two different accounts of the story that Aileen herself told investigators, where in both stories it was self-defense. Aileen's public defender did have a great piece of evidence, which made self-defense more plausible, but this was found not admissible. Get this. The first victim, Richard Mallory, had been convicted of attempted rape in Maryland.
Really?
Spent time in a maximum security facility and received therapy for the remediation of sexual offenders. And the defense found his little therapy records, which said, quote, Richard had possessed strong sociopathic trends, end quote.
What Aileen had said was that he tried to rape her.
Which could possibly have been true.
Yep. I mean, but he was the first victim, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So like that would kind of make sense to start her like to start everything off as she had something once again horrific done to her. And this time she actually had she was able to pull the defense on it. I don't know. We don't know. I don't know what to believe.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
either.
hard.
Yeah.
And that's what I was wondering the whole time. It's obviously she's been abused her entire life, probably had been raped as a prostitute. I don't know, by Richard or by any of the other men.
100%. 100%.
If it had happened, it did happen, and it just triggered something in her brain. Like any inkling that it would happen again would just set her off.
PTSD.
Again. Yeah.
Yep.
Of course, I don't want to say that Richard did try to rape her or did. We're just saying, And at the end of the day, we really have no idea what happened in the car. Aileen did testify against her attorney's wishes, and it did not go well. She stuck to her self-defense claim, but got super angry during her cross-examination. Aileen ended up invoking her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination 25 times. Aileen was the defense's only witness. They didn't call anybody else. And on January 27th, 1992, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on all accounts. As this was read out, Aileen screamed out, quote, "Sons of bitches, I was raped. I hope you get raped. Scumbags of America," end quote. Obviously, the jury didn't take this well because they also had to vote on whether Aileen was going to get the death penalty or not, and it was a unanimous vote 4 days later. So the next trial was for the combined murders of Charles Humphreys, Troy Barres, and David Spears. Exactly 2 months after being sentenced to death, Aileen pled no contest to these other murders, telling the judge she wanted to, quote, "get right with God," end quote. No contest always confuses me because it doesn't make any sense. But for those who don't know, it's your way of saying, like, the prosecution has enough to convict me, but I'm not admitting guilt. But it has the same effect as pleading guilty. So there was no trial. We didn't really figure out what happened or what Aileen's story was. We just went straight to sentencing. So before being sentenced for these 3 murders, Aileen gave a statement to the court saying, quote, "I wanted to confess to you that Richard Mallory did violently rape me, as I've told you, but these others did not. They only began to start to," end quote. By the time these trials started, Aileen stopped contacting her adopted mother, Arlene, suspecting that she only faked being her friend for money and attention. She also later claimed that Arlene and the attorney she hired convinced her to plead no contest because the attorney was too inexperienced to handle the trial. She also said that Arlene tried to convince her to commit suicide in prison.
Do we believe that?
Who knows?
Yeah.
This lady. On May 15th, 1992, Aileen was handed 3 more death sentences. In November of the same year, Aileen racked up her 4th death sentence after pleading guilty to murder of Charles Carskadden. February the following year, Aileen received her 6th and final death sentence for the murder of Walter Antonio. And Aileen was never charged with the murder of Peter Sims because his body was never found, despite confessing. In Florida, whenever someone is sentenced to death, the case is automatically appealed to the Florida Supreme Court, even if the defendant refuses. They're just confirming, like, hey, does this person need to be put to death? Florida Supreme Court upheld their decision, and Aileen filed a petition to have the case heard in front of the United States Supreme Court, which declined. Aileen argued that her counsel was ineffective in not being able to bring up Richard Mallory's prior conviction and the fact that they didn't call up any witnesses to corroborate her childhood abuse. Several of her childhood friends and neighbors did offer to testify on behalf of her, but her public defenders never contacted them or requested for them to show up at the trial. Eventually, Aileen gave up and petitioned the Florida Supreme Court to dismiss her counsel and to dismiss all of her pending appeals. She wrote in her letter, quote, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again, too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this she's crazy stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm trying to tell the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." End quote. Aileen spent the next 10 years imprisoned at Broward Correctional Institution. Her time there was anything peaceful, as one might expect. Aileen accused the prison guards of tainting her food with things like dirt, saliva, and urine. She also said they would continually catcall and berate her, perform unnecessary strip searches, kick her cell door while she was sleeping, and refuse to replace her mattress that got moldy. Aileen claimed that the constant abuse from guards was probably their attempt to get her to commit suicide. She would go on to boycott showers and meals when certain guards were on duty. Eventually, Aileen was transferred to the Florida State Prison to await her impending execution. After a temporary stay of execution to confirm once again that Aileen was sane, Governor Jeb Bush lifted the stay and the date was set. Before her execution, Aileen sat down with documentarian Nick Broomfield and gave an interview for his film, Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer. So in the interview, Aileen talked about the torture she faced while she was in prison. She confessed that the motives for the murders was robbery and to not leave any witnesses. At one point, when she thought the cameras had been turned off, Aileen switched her story again. She told the crew that they truly were in self-defense, but that she couldn't stand being on death row and she just wanted to die, and quickly. Towards the end of the interview, Aileen turned and began to yell at Nick in a fit of rage. Her last words in the interview were, quote, "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass," end quote. On October 9th, 2002, Aileen declined her last meal and opted for a cup of coffee instead. Aileen was asked if she had any final words, and she said, quote, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." End quote. Aileen Wuornos was executed and declared dead at 9:47 a.m. She was the second woman in Florida and the 10th in the country to be executed since the U.S. resumed executions for women. Aileen's remains were cremated and her ashes were spread under a tree in Michigan by her childhood friend, Don Botkins. Tyria is now living a private life in Pennsylvania with her wife. She got several offers for book deals, but so far hasn't taken the opportunity. And that was the story of Aileen Wuornos.
Dang. That was
Nuts.
good coverage. That was good coverage, Kylie. Very
Yeah.
good.
Thank you.
Don't you think it's kind of bullshit about her ex-partner just living out her life?
She had to know something.
Yeah. I mean, she confided in her about that one guy. And I mean, if you keep on doing it, I mean, I don't know. I know bad things can happen to people, but I don't think it was self-defense. Sorry, but
No. And with that, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. If you want even more information, including photos from the case, you can check out our blog on overmydeadpod.com. Be sure to leave us a review wherever you're listening to this and check us out on social media at Over My Dead Pod. And we'll see you next week with another case. Bye.
Bye.
bye. I was gonna ask Kate if she listened to the rap battles.
Oh,
That
yeah.
was-
No, I did not.
Okay.
Oh.
But apparently Cameron did, and our friend Carolina did as well. And I remember driving them back home from a dinner this past weekend, and they wouldn't stop talking about it.
What were their what's Cam's thoughts?
What's
on
team?
Kendrick's. I
Okay,
remember
good.
they're both on Kendrick's team. I don't remember like the specific reasons, but I do remember them like I kind of like blanked out because I didn't know what they were talking about the shooting that happened at Drake's house and how
Yeah.
it was one of his security guards. But then apparently articles came out that the security guard, it's like a fake company that was made. And
Oh.
so the security guard, it's the only person that is under the name of the security company. Like Drake made this security company, but it only has one employee, and the one employee is the person that got shot. So like it's a fake company. Yeah.
That's suspicious.
Yeah. And so then I was like, money laundering. That's what it's immediately what I thought.
You never know.
More crimes.
Yeah. So
One eternity later.
You can stop recording if you want. We're just
oh, are we
talking
done?
right now.
Oh yeah, my bad.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.